was a very junior diplomat in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And of course there was this exchange of letters where Saddam, sort of blamed Kuwait for taking a few actions, which was all erroneous. I mean, there was nothing concrete. So there was this back and forth of letters, and things were happening.
Following the speech of Saddam Hussein, which he threatened Kuwait and threatened UAE. At that time, our headquarters told us to go ahead and full alert, and we did.
The escalation was underway. And I remember having conversations with Egyptian diplomats. What's he doing? This is not what we've heard before from him being Saddam. And we heard then what we heard from the Jordanians, indeed from the Kuwaitis themselves, and the Saudis. Now, don't worry, it's just the way he is, but this won't go anywhere. He's not that stupid.
I received a phone call from a friend of mine telling me to put on the TV and watch what's happening. Asked me about the massing of the Iraqi soldiers. And he said, "Do you think Saddam will invade?" And I said, "Absolutely not."
A girlfriend of mine who's British, we used to jog. So we went around and we had heard things that there was, maybe something was going to happen. And we were kind of joking how, yes, but if they come, they would never come past the wall, the old wall, which is like the first ring road.
And he said, "Doctor, I think you are wrong. There are information that Saddam is serious. He's going to go all the way."
And then I remember I was part of the delegation that went with the then Prime Minister and Crown Prince Sheikh Saad. And there was this meeting that the Saudis held in Jeddah, the city of Jeddah, on the 1st of August, 1990, so a day before the invasion. And I was a young junior diplomat, and I was lucky enough to be among the Kuwaiti delegation that went there. And there was this meeting with the Iraqis there. The meeting we didn't arrive to any results in the meeting, and there was this decision that there'll be another couple of meetings, one in Baghdad and one in Kuwait, to resolve the issues that were between Kuwait and Iraq at that time. Of course, we flew back to Kuwait around 6 p.m. that evening, and the 1st of August 1990, and as you well know, that the Iraqis invaded us at around 1:30 in the morning on the 2nd of August. So all that meeting was more or less of a charade. They had planned to invade all along.
Security Council has been called upon my request when I have received instruction from Kuwait for a meeting, an urgent meeting on the eve of the 2nd of August 1990, after we have heard that the Iraqi troops crossed the border and continue their way to the capital of Kuwait.
If you want to take the world completely by surprise, do something unbelievably stupid. I left Cairo literally days before the invasion, maybe 2 days before. And right up to the end, it's just Saddam being Saddam. Not to worry. I woke up my first day in Washington to hear the news that he was in Kuwait. As a Foreign Service officer, I immediately thought of my colleagues at the embassy. I knew several of them very, very well, and it was just, oh my God.
The invasion itself, we were not expecting it at all. Not only Kuwait, but also all other members of the United Nations, Security Council in particular. Everybody was surprised. Even the permanent representative of the United States was surprised totally about the level of the massing of troops on the border, then the aggression upon Kuwait within few hours.
We're hearing that Iraqi forces have crossed the border. And if you've been in any kind of situation like that, the confusion is just indescribable. Rumors, counter rumors, cross rumors. During that Kuwaiti night, within an hour or so, they could hear the gunfire. You know, that was the confirmation, basically, that the Iraqis were in. And it is sometimes said that the Kuwaitis simply ran without a fight. That wasn't at all true.
The runway was damaged, so some of the pilots used the narrow road, which never have been done in the whole world, to take off from such a narrow service road between the aircraft pins and Al-Jabat.
And they said we cannot land because already Iraqi surrounded the airport and sometimes already in the airport.
By noontime, Kuwait was gone, so like Al Salam base was at the north. Our headquarters and the main base by the international was evacuated to our base. So we were over-flooded also with a lot of population.
بسيطة تفاجأنا بوجود باصات داخلة من الاتجاه طبعا العراق، وكانت الباصات تحمل الأعلام البيضاء، لكن اللي لفت نظرنا أن في آليات مسلحة بين هذه الباصات، فقمنا على طول يعني أغرنا نعم هذه الآليات اللي يفترض نتعامل معاها كان عملية خداع لتسهيل عملية مرور الباصات هذه الوصول إلى هدفها بدون ما يتعامل معاها، لكن الحمد لله رب العالمين بوجود الآليات الصغيرة المسلحة عطتنا على طول فكرة أن هذه الآليات اللي يفترض نتعامل معاها، فعلى طول غيرنا نزلنا على الجانب اليمين وبدأنا نتعامل مع الوحدات اللي نازلة.
بذاك الوقت أيقن الشيخ سعد الله يرحمه، وهو أساساً عسكري، وأعتقد وأجزم أنه يحلل الأمور هذه تحليل دقيق. تحليله كان أن السيارات هذه اللي حاملة جنود وداخل الكويت بشكل سريع، دخولها إلى قصر دسمان وقصر الحكم وقصر الشعب.
خلال الفترة هذه طبعاً جينا مسكنا على الكتف اللي هو قبل بالضبط المفرق مال الصبية، وبدأنا نتعامل مع الوحدات، لكن مثل ما قلت أنا يظل هو عنده هدف معين متجه فيه ونازل حق الكويت ومتجه حق هدفه، فوجه لنا اللي هي مدافع الهاون على أساس التعامل معنا وتحاول أنها تعيقنا في أن احنا نتعامل مع الوحدات اللي داخله.
A Kuwaiti armor unit was actually able to deploy. If you look at a map of Kuwait, there is a town called Jahra and a road junction there. That was kind of the critical link into Kuwait City. The Kuwaitis positioned themselves at that junction and held up the Iraqis until the Kuwaitis ran out of ammunition, out of tank rounds. That bought time for Kuwaitis who would have been killed, like the Emir, the Crown Prince, senior Al Sabah family members. It bought them time to get out of Kuwait and into Saudi Arabia.
الشيخ سعد هالكلام قال لي فهد خلنا نطلع من غرفة العمليات في وزارة الدفاع. غرفة عمليات وزارة الدفاع كانت كل الحكومة موجودة، من سيدي صاحب السمو الشيخ صباح وقت ذاك كان وزير خارجية، وكل القيادات العسكرية والمدنية كلها من الحكومة كوزراء ومن القيادات العسكرية.
There was Iraqi helicopters trying to land inside Dasman Palace. We tried our best to make the Iraqis think that His Highness is inside. We made a diversion motorcade. One goes to the Bayan Palace, the others not a motorcade, only His Highness with the Crown Prince, with Sheikh Jabir Ali. He took them straight to Saudi's borders. We started fighting till we knew that His Highness is out of Kuwait.
One of the important goals of Saddam Hussein was to destroy the legitimacy of the government of Kuwait through seizing, surely, God forbid, His Highness the Emir and the leadership in Kuwait. But God willing, they were able to leave Kuwait at the appropriate time, reach Saudi Arabia and established the temporary government, which was the legitimate government of Kuwait.
My feeling was that Saddam Hussein first target in Kuwait was the Amiri Palace in Disman. And I know why he did that, because he wanted either to capture the Emir or to kill him. His first aim probably to capture him and force him to abdicate. So he will say the Emir of Kuwait abdicated for a new government, and then he will start forming his own government.
I happened to go by the Emir's palace, which I mentioned was right downtown, about maybe 300 yards from the embassy. There was a gentleman sitting in traditional clothing outside on a chair, and he was doing his duty to protect the Emir's palace because there was nobody around. And so he told me a story that he was on the phone with his father when the Iraqi troops by helicopter came in and landed on the grounds of the Emir's palace. And he was speaking to his father when he was killed by the Iraqis. We found there was a coffin just outside the door of the Emir's personal rooms, and that was a coffin the Iraqis apparently had brought in because they wanted to kill the Emir, put him in the coffin and show him off in Iraq.
And had the latter happened, there might not have been any legitimate authority around which to build the later liberation of Kuwait. So these small things matter in history.
When the guards on the gate of the base called me and they said there is an Iraqi colonel, he wants to talk with you. He's from Republican Guards. Funny enough, he saluted me. I was a colonel, he was a colonel. He saluted me, then he said, you have to surrender. I said, okay, can you guarantee the safety of my men? He said, yes.
I told them we must retreat on a safe passage, not to be captured all these people. You know, it's a disaster when they capture about 2,000 in one. So we tried to withdraw in a safe way.
My decision was not to withdraw. But later on I realized that this order was to save our ships, and saving these ships gave us, as a Kuwait Navy, a start.
Our fight was with Saddam and his regime. It was never with the Iraqi people. We've lived side by side with the Iraqis for centuries, and we will live with them for eternity. So it was always with Saddam. Saddam was a brutal man. Saddam was a man that ruled his country brutally, that killed more Iraqis than he killed any other people. So he was a very unpredictable, brutal kind of criminal. Now you say, why would he invade Kuwait? Because he's a criminal, because he's that kind of person. He's a kind of person that would do anything it takes for him to get his goals.
We called for the meeting at around 2:00 a.m. of the 2nd of August. I saw the representatives of more than 162 members of the United Nations, the representatives themselves, the ambassadors themselves, leaving their houses from 12 o'clock midnight when the word has spread around that Kuwait has been aggressed upon, came to the Security Council in order to support the Kuwaiti case and defend Kuwait security and against this flagrant violation of the international law.
إن المطلب الكويتي واضح وبسيط، وهو وقف هذا الغزو فوراً.
they didn't expect, what happened. To wake up and find that their country is under invasion and the Iraqis was in the streets, which is very strange. Normally you hear that there is a war somewhere and you prepare yourself, but to find your country has been taken suddenly overnight, that was a shock for many people.
Saw the TV and I thought it was something document. I couldn't feel that it was a reality. And I shouted, "Yusuf, Yusuf," my husband's name. "What's this? Can you please see what I'm seeing?" He says, "Yes, Miriam, it's true. Kuwait has been annexed in less than 1 hour or 1 hour or something like that." So he just pulled me down to reality. It shattered all my beliefs, my values, and my understanding of politics.
We were working together. We wonder how Kuwait was running during the invasion. We were so managed ourselves from every aspect, not just in oil, in the electricity, in the social co-ops, and of course we were seizing and we were utilizing the oil and gas we have to keep Ministry of Electricity and Water, Kuwait in summer, very harsh.
We try to look into, if there is anybody who wanted health support. There was, of course, people need to live, need some food, need to have some, day-to-day living requirement.
Our children, my boys, and all the Kuwaiti young were responsible for cleaning the streets, for delivering food to the elderly, for treating the elderly, taking them to the clinics that we had in the basements, etc. They were doing a fantastic job, the young people.
My whole family was in the city. Many of them were military people, many of them were civil, but young also. Many females which are underaged, and a lot of them housewives, who were part of the how to live their life on the base of day by day, how to support themselves with water, enough water, and how to succeed, and to have their own food and supplies. I think the civic society of Kuwait was working absolutely fine at that moment.
Aswar Gabandi came to the house and she said, "Look, I'll try very hard to get you out." She said, "But you can't tell anybody." And this is when you understand, you can read history and stuff, but that's when you understand that there's decisions that you have to make that sometimes are selfish. So Klaus and I just left with her. We didn't say goodbye to anybody. And so, afterwards, wow, I might get emotional. You feel guilty, Wow.
Now I've been confined, I can't do anything. It was really difficult for me, so I guess my dad decided that I should just go back to school, and that's when I snuck through the desert of Saudi Arabia.
And we were able to escape, myself and my family, through the desert, actually, in cars jumping over pipelines and getting to Saudi Arabia.
And then you have to go over the oil pipes because they weren't buried. And that was really bizarre because you can't just go over the pipes. So then you go over, you find a place you go over, but that doesn't mean you can get over the other one.
And I had with me in the car my 3-month-old son and my almost 92-year-old dad.
General Mohammed al-Badr knocked on the door where I was, and he said that we have been caught. We're amateurs. We're not professionals. And apparently there were too many cars in front of the house that we were. The Iraqis just saw too many cars. They just came in to see the house, and they saw my friends with the money on the floor and distributing. Immediately they caught them. And he took him, because it was General Mohammed al-Badr, he took him and all the others to Knife Palace, and they tortured them there. They tortured them really bad until they confessed who they were. I used to stay, probably in each house 3, 4 days, 5 days, and then we used to jump to another house. That's how we used to do it. We knew this place, there was no checkpoint. Suddenly we saw a checkpoint there. And there was a car in front of me. So I told the young boy who was driving, I said, look, this is it. I just found out that I forgot I had my Uzi with me. He checked the car. And he put his hand under my seat, and then he looked at me like this. And he said, God bless you, who does not defend his country is a coward. Wish you well and go.
Our cell wasn't just focusing on the military side of it. We were focusing on what we call it a passive resistance. How to keep the people holding the ground, how to keep a chain of supply, food, electricity, water, medical. It was a challenge, really a challenge when you are fighting among the civilians, and in the meantime you need to protect the civilians, you need to protect the kids, you need to protect the elderly.
They would, they'd be in hiding, and then they'd go out, sneak out about, I mean, they're heroes, do that. And then they'd pass the information up through their network that they had set up, and it would work its way back. I can't say enough about the heroic action of those people. And these were just, average people.
And a sat phone at that time, you had to put the dish up on the roof. And you have to be careful, because sometimes they would go up the roof and check on you.
The aim was to provide intelligence and exact information. What we did really, when they send from Riyadh, they send dozens of telecommunication devices. It was through satellite.
I used to give them daily reports, and we used to communicate with our people in Taif, with the late Crown Prince at the time, Sheikh Saad, Minister of Defense, Sheikh Salim, and others. And we were giving them every day what was happening, etc. We were not the only ones, by the way, doing that. There were other phones in Kuwait, and they were doing the same thing, and they were doing a good job.
I would say they did what little that they could, as often as they could, in their so doing. I think they gave hope to the rest of the Kuwaitis and certain pride. There was a lot of Kuwaiti pride for having been rolled over by somebody who they thought was their ally up until August the 1st of 1990, and now they had small opportunities to get back at them. So.
From the first day, I was certain that the only alternative to crush Saddam was by force, and not by regional GCC only, and not Arab force, but international, and mainly US, European, and Britain.
There were some who felt right away that military action would be required. My position was, let's examine all alternatives, let's see what it is that we are going to get involved in. And so there was a healthy debate, as there always should be before you think about going to war. And President Bush did not make a decision in the first couple of days. He thought about it, reflected on it, he got advice from others. And then he went out to Aspen that weekend, and Mrs. Thatcher, Prime Minister Thatcher, was there. And she is famously alleged to have said, or it is claimed she said, and it's a great story, so I'm not going to argue with it, don't go wobbly, George. I don't think George was going wobbly at all. And so when he finished with his weekend in Aspen and came back to Washington, D.C., when he was arriving at the White House that Sunday evening, as he got off the plane, he had made up his mind. And when the reporters said to him, well, Mr. President, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? His simple answer, this invasion of Kuwait will not stand.
This will not stand. This will not stand, this aggression against Kuwait. I have to go to work. I got to go to work.
As a young soldier, to hear the commander-in-chief stand in front of the nation and really, you know, put his foot down and say, this is what we're going to do, and then actually follow through with what he says we're going to do. That was empowering to me, to see that. And I felt a lot of confidence in our leaders that, you know, even though there was a lot of uncertainty, I felt like our leadership really supported us and had our backs.
The President of the United States is Commander-in-Chief. And that is, in my view, that's the most important role he plays, as the Commander-in-Chief. And we were very fortunate. Our team, we had Bush 41, George H.W. Bush, is our Commander-in-Chief and President. The leader sets the tone, whether it's in the Army or whether it's being the President of the United States. So he set that tone, so all of the people working for him, all of his civilian leadership followed that beat.
He had the President as Commander-in-Chief, and he was supported by what we call the Gang of Eight. And what made it work so well is we had a president who had enormous experience.
In favor of the draft resolution contained in document.
الرجاء من الذين يؤيدون مشروع القرار في الوثيقة S-21969 رفع أيديهم.
Those opposed or against.
It was very, very telling to see that this resolution was under Chapter 7, which has not been provoked since the Korean War. We did not rush to use force. We asked at that resolution 660 that there should be talk between Kuwait and Iraq in order to solve their problems. Unfortunately, after 3 or 4 days, Iraqi government increased their level of intervention, the military intervention in Kuwait. Security Council discussed the issue again on the 5th and the 6th of August. But unfortunately, they were adamant to refuse Resolution 660, to refuse withdrawal of their forces, to refuse to sit with Kuwait.
And remember, we built a great coalition. The coalition was built by my relationships with other countries, and I think one of the real geniuses in all this was Jim Baker and Mr. Cheney, who were able to build this coalition as they traveled around the world.
And the coalition that they built was terribly important, because if you didn't have the coalition out there, then you would have a situation where it was the U.S. alone going after the Middle East again and fighting in the Middle East, and that's not something that we wanted. So that coalition gave us great credibility and was very, very important.
They had to do a lot of political work around the world. First in Saudi Arabia, to allow us to put all those troops on the ground in Saudi Arabia. Obviously with the United Nations, to get the United Nations resolution, and with the American people through Congress. And then I think one of the most magnificent aspects of that war, and it doesn't quite get the play I think it should, is the building of the coalition. And the president was the lead on building that coalition.
We had alerted forces ready to go as soon as the Saudis said they could come. And after Mr. Cheney had spent time with the king and others in the kingdom, he called me back and said, we can move.
The first unit we put over there was the 82nd Airborne Division, because we could get them over there quickly by air. But then we built up not only the combat power, but we also started to build up the support apparatus to make sure that if he told us, okay, I want you to execute the final objective, we would be ready with the support package, and then we could bring in the combat units.
Now, the 82nd Airborne Division is going to take some time to get there. But those first troops on the ground said to the Iraqis, don't you even think about coming south. Now, we know that a few airplanes and some paratroopers on the ground are nothing but a speed bump if you decided to come south. But you needed to know that if you came south, you are now facing the United States of America and a great coalition. Don't even think about it.
Don't remember the exact day, but all of a sudden Jim called me up first thing in the morning. It's like, get back up here, pack the airplanes up, put the equipment together. Some decisions have been made. I will meet you on the ground when you get here.
John Bono called me on the phone and said, Butch, I have a deal for you. I want you to send a corps to Kuwait. I said, okay. Any parameters? He said, yeah, you have to be there. So, and I can't remember whether it's 15 days or 30 days. Whatever it was, there was no time to be messing around.
We had to move from Germany up through the North Sea ports, and probably one of the more interesting aspects and one of the little known aspects of Desert Storm was the incredible move that had to take place to rendezvous in the desert in Saudi Arabia. It was incredible. In fact, later, as an aside, I had a Russian general tell me that the only military in the world that could have pulled that off was the U.S. military.
That we were going to deploy and move the division, which included the Tiger Brigade of the 2nd Armored Division. That really put a jolt into everybody's heart at that time, figuring out that we were going to deploy very soon.
We began to get the global positioning system. We hadn't seen any of that before, so the Army went out and procured a limited number of those. So most of our maneuver formations had the GPS system, so we could navigate in the desert.
When you think about General Schwarzkopf, and I really think, as we all did, that he had the right focus, and he was a warrior, and he was going to get us in and get us out of there okay.
When you look at why America had to get involved into the fight, here you had, Saddam and the Iraqi army that invaded, Kuwait, and it was an ally of ours. Naturally, Saudi Arabia to the south thought that, Saddam might just continue moving, further south. So I think it was important for us, because as I look at all the things that were going on in the world at that time, I mean, who else? Who else could have possibly intervened and stopped that?
Our perspective was, if in fact we're going to have to react quickly, what are the strategic centers of gravity, and how do we put together an air campaign that could have the greatest impact and effect in the shortest period of time? That became the basis of an initial plan that was entitled Instant Thunder.
And then Instant Thunder sort of became a template on which Horner actually built the first couple, 3 days of the air campaign. But what we actually did was considerably different from that, modified quite a bit from that. One reason was that Schwarzkopf insisted that we go after the Iraqi army, the deployed army in Kuwait, from minute one.
I have met General Powell before. When he saw me, he hugged me, and he was saying, my friend is going to be very soon. And I said, General, I never doubt you. I know it's going to take place, but I'm worried about the Kuwaitis. At that time, there were about between 250,000 to 300,000 Kuwaiti citizens inside Kuwait. He said, Doctor, we will get the Iraqi out without having one Kuwaiti touched.
And so any kind of news from the outside would get spread. And of course, there was a lot of disinformation in it. And that there was actually a coalition building up, gave them great encouragement. I think it helped spur on the resistance to a greater degree, because I think they started to see as particularly those led by the Western nations were committed to freeing Kuwait. I think they started to see that maybe it wasn't going to last forever. Maybe they weren't going to lose their country.
حط عينك حط على اللي فوق تحت. اي اللي فوق تحت.
When Asrar organized for us to get out, she said, the only thing I ask is that when you have the possibility, you have to speak, you have to tell people. Asrar was a dear friend of my brother's and mine, and she was actually a teacher. She started at kindergarten, and then she worked with the Khalifa School for Artistic. She was quite an amazing person. And as you know, she was martyred. She was killed.
My wife and several women were taking care of the infants, the newborn, in the hospital. And I know that this was discussed in the Congress, that some were doubtful about what the Iraqis did. My wife was there. She used to go every day in the morning to the hospital, maternity hospital. And one day they went there and they found all the children on the ground, and the incubators were all taken.
We were threatened. Our family back home were threatened. If we were exposed to the media, saying our names or being exposed to the media, they'll have to check us from some people from the, the other part, which is the Iraqi or other people. They might take the information and threat our families.
This guy enter Kuwait, target children, target women, target all people in the hospitals by unplugging the support machines of very sick people, old people.
And that scared everybody more than anything else, is the way the Kuwaitis are being treated and how the Iraqis were acting in Kuwait City. That was one of the biggest impetus to get in, but the civilians are taking huge risks to work against the Iraqis at home.
And again, the Kuwaiti resistance was literally heroic, with an unimaginably brutal enemy that would murder them in a way you wouldn't want to ever contemplate, just on suspicion.
And then I went home, and I went to Chicago. I'm from the Midwest, so I flew into Chicago, and I was on a hotline so that people could call, just family members and stuff that could call and at least speak to somebody that had come out of Kuwait, so that I could tell them the generosity of the Kuwaitis and not to worry about their family members, and that people were working together and not to be too worried. I mean, of course you're going to be worried. Yeah, what can you say? I mean, you don't go through those things much in your life, and so you try to speak about it as much as you can, so that things do happen in life, and I think, ignorance is not bliss, and it does not help for cultural understanding by any means. But it is because of Asrar that I got out when I did, and it is because of Asrar that I have spoken and tried to contribute in whatever way I could.
And we decided to establish the Citizen for Free Kuwait. CFK were trying to help the president. In explaining to the American public opinion what took place. We were able to translate the Kuwaiti constitution into English, and especially the section about human rights. We are very proud of it. Kuwait respects human rights. Kuwait is a small society, peaceful, democratic. And that was our approach to the American public opinion. It is worth fighting for. It is worth liberating.
And we were so lucky because the government believed in the civic society and student organization since the beginning of 1960s. So we are so into active mood, but that wouldn't be happening without the help of our allied countries like the United States, the UK, the standing and the leadership of Margaret Thatcher, W. Bush, the father, and all the United Nations and all Arab and Islam countries. So the world was with Kuwait, and that's the beauty of diplomatic investment of Kuwait since 1960s.
It was a continuous debate. One of the Arab Americans, I remember, he was a Catholic, whom when I confronted, he said, the church forbid war. The Catholic Church, they, like any other religion, they're against violence, against war, but they believe in just war. Our war was just.
We knew that the American general in charge of the American forces in Saudi Arabia was coming to meet with our leadership, and we were excited to see him. And here walks in General Schwarzkopf, storming Norman, in all his presence and with his team, and we had this great meeting with him, and he assured us at that time of the liberation of Kuwait. He assured us of the capabilities that the U.S. military had to liberate Kuwait. And I remember the last words he said, exiting that meeting, he said, Your Highness, you will get your country back.
اسمحوا لي سيادة الرئيس أن أغتنم هذه المناسبة لأخاطب أهلي وعشيرتي أبناء الكويت الأوفياء. أخاطبهم من على هذا المنبر العريق، منبر الحق والعدل، منبر الإشاعة والأمل، مؤكدا لهم إن الله سبحانه وتعالى ناصرنا بفضل سواعدهم وعزيمتهم، وبفضل منظمة الأمم المتحدة، ومناصرة الأشقاء والأصدقاء، وجميع الخيرين والشرفاء في العالم، وأن خروج الغزاة آت لا ريب فيه بإذن الله العلي القدير، وسنعود إلى كويتنا كما عهدناها دار أمن وأمان.
Iraq must withdraw from Kuwait completely, immediately, and without condition. Kuwait's legitimate government must be restored, the security and stability of the Gulf must be assured, and American citizens abroad must be protected. These goals are not ours alone. They've been endorsed by the United Nations Security Council 5 times in as many weeks. Most countries share our concern for principle, and many have a stake in the stability. This is not, as Saddam Hussein would have it, the United States against Iraq. It is Iraq against the world.
We have given Iraq a timetable that you have until the 15th of January. From the 27th of November, you have around 2 months, a little bit more than 2 months, a pause for Iraqi to rethink. And United States accept to sit with Iraq in Geneva in order to convince them that better for them to withdraw their forces.
President Bush sends Secretary Baker to meet with Tariq Aziz of the Iraqi government, the Prime Minister, and he can't be moved. Saddam Hussein can't be moved. They're not going anywhere. And that was the last chance to avoid war. President Bush wanted to avoid war. Schwarzkopf and I wanted to avoid war. War always has unintended consequences you never thought of. And so we did not want to go to war.
And we understood that the Republican Guards divisions, there were 5 of them, I think, were the absolutely cream of the Iraqi army. And the war games we ran based upon computer war games, some of the answers we got on that were pretty scary. We could expect a long fight, and we could expect a high number of casualties in the 10 to 20,000 range.
The morning of the 17th of January, we were underway in the Central Gulf with a task force of ships that were loaded with Tomahawk weapons. when General Neal got the call from General Schwarzkopf to start launching the Tomahawk missiles,
I gave the command over the radio to fire the Tomahawk missiles.
the first thing they wanted to do was make sure that CENTCOM understood that once those missiles were launched, they were not going to be called back. It was a one-way trip.
You know, once you fire them, you can't turn them back. And I said, fire away. so you know, that's the kind of tension that was going on, because I think there was still that wishful thinking on our part that this thing would not occur.
3, 2, 1.
Famous night when we launched, and everybody is watching it on television and listening to the reports coming in and seeing these remarkable weapons that we had that people had always wondered would they work. And then suddenly here come the Tomahawk missiles. The media was starting to say, well, why isn't it over already? Look at these things, look at these weapons. And so Mr. Cheney and I had to go on television to calm people down. And that's when I made an expression. Our strategy is very simple. First, we're going to cut them off, and then we're going to kill them.
Then we launched the helicopters in across the Saudi-Iraq border to take out the radar sites, and then that obviously blinded the Iraqis so that when our aircraft came in on station, they basically went in unencumbered.
But they basically blew a hole into the front end of his air defenses, and then the Air Force took those air defenses out. The first target was in Baghdad. It was the Baghdad electrical power plant. We knew when the air war was going to start, and we were down the Army Operations Center. And like in most operations centers now, you have CNN or one of the major networks are playing there because they usually provide some intelligence that we might not be able to get otherwise. And then all of a sudden the signal went out, and we lost the CNN lost the signal. And that was the first time we had real-time bomb damage assessment, as far as I'm concerned, because we knew the electrical power source or electrical power system was the bomb target.
I was so angry at the enemy, and this was the day that I was waiting for as I was climbing up. And it got me, and then it was just a matter of more than a minute, made the radio call to my flight that I was hit.
Colonel Mohammed Mubarak, actually he ended up retiring as a major general. He was in one of the lead wings going back in, and was shot down over Kuwait and held in captivity.
Within the first 24 hours, we attacked over 150 targets across the breadth and depth of Iraq. But it wasn't just precision and stealth. It wasn't just technology. It was this effects-based approach to planning.
I'm not sure it could not have been won entirely by air power. Certainly, many Iraqi soldiers had found a way to surrender to us before. They crossed the lines and surrendered before G-Day, the kickoff.
During the first 3-4 hours of the air war, we just wiped them out. I mean, it was an unbelievable display of power. You know, they think our air power's pretty impressive. We haven't even kicked off the A-Team yet.
The first day's attack were going to be straight towards Kuwait City, which would draw the Republican Guards, who were really the strategic reserve of the Iraqis in that part of Iraq and Kuwait, toward Kuwait City, we anticipated.
Let's don't get bogged down in a slugfest in Kuwait. Let's make them think we're going to do that, because they had built all these defenses, tank ditches filled with oil and flame, where they could flame them and so forth.
We did maneuvers from the sea. We practiced going ashore very visibly in front of the TV cameras so that Saddam stayed pointing to the south.
That came in from the back and the side of the Iraqi forces. Part of that, though, was to make sure that the Iraqis maintained their forces pointing east towards the Gulf, where they anticipated that the United States would launch an amphibious invasion a la Injan and come ashore.
I mean, the Marines were the first into the city, and of course they were ahead of the schedule, which caused them consternation by obviously everybody, the powers to be, particularly General Schwarzkopf, and he had to get the left hook, the 18th Airborne Corps, and more importantly the 7th Corps, moving quicker.
What dictated that strategy? The Iraqis. They planted themselves in the desert, and once they planted themselves with divisions right across the Kuwait-Saudi border, as one of my colleagues once described it, they're golf balls sitting on a tee, waiting to be hit. And that's what we did.
And very quietly, and I'm not sure how you do this quietly, you moved 100,000 person 2 Corps well to the west so that we could be set up and maneuver all the way around the Republican Guard and come in from the direction that they were not looking.
I actually told the Marine commanders, now look fellas, when the attack begins, I want your guys to push forward across the border, but don't get decisively engaged. I don't want to lose a lot of Marines doing this because we're going to go around them. So your mission is to attack and hold them in place, freeze them. Well, the Marines did better than that.
And so General Schwarzkopf, as the maestro, as the orchestrator, had to try and make sure that he slowed down the attacking Marine forces and allowed the left hook to materialize so that in fact you brought them both together at the same time.
You know, all those fire pits and minefields and wire that the Iraqis had put to keep us from going through, Marine enlisted men have gone through. And once they were through, they opened big holes. And the Marines just poured through. So we had to tell the 7th Corps that was going around, you better hurry up. Marines are on their way to Kuwait City.
As we crossed the berm and stopped, and then started again and stopped and started again, and then went around the covering force of the cavalry regiment, whose purpose is to knock out all the initial defenses and reconnaissance so that the main body, the 1st Armored Division and the 3rd Armored Division, could make the turn and then slam into and destroy the Republican Guard. And we did just that.
Come around from the left side with a 3-division fist, and so the opening of that fight was the 2nd Cavalry Regiment, led by then Colonel Don Holder, ran into the Iraqi Republican Guard security zone at what's been called the Battle of 73 East.
When we came up on them and started engaging and knocking out their tanks, and we weren't taking any hits or any casualties, and we were just, destroying their tanks at 3,300 meters, and they were firing, but they couldn't outrange us, and it was just incredible. And I said, okay, this is not going to last long.
The Iraqis were trying to get out of Kuwait, and they went up this highway into Iraq, and our Air Force was having a field day on these escaping forces.
And USS Ranger was one of the major launching carriers against the, what's now called the mother of all retreats, the highway of death.
Iraqis running north, coming through 4th Ring Road toward Jahra, and even they're running trucks tanks without tires. You can hear, yes, wheels running on the road. They made a mess. They made a mess in our roads because they're running away.
ليلتها ليلة انسحاب القوات العراقية طبعا كانت تهتز الأرض لأن كل المدرعات والآليات كانت تتحرك بنفس الوقت. كنا تفاجأنا احنا طبعا بنفس الوقت اللي هو تم حرق الآبار وما كانت الكهرباء شغالة. فكنا قاعدين في برا البيت وكنا نشوف الدنيا منورة ناحية الجنوب طبعا اللون الأحمر اللي هو مال النيران اللي كانت مولعة المنطقة الجنوبية والآبار. وكنا الأرض كانت يعني أمانة صوت كان رهيب.
That last morning, Mr. Cheney and I went over to see the president, the Gang of Eight, and I briefed him on a map as to where we were and told him we'd be back in a couple of days, a day or two, to tell him that it's time to bring this to an end. And his response was, well, if it's that close, why not do it now? We've got Kuwait City back. The Iraqi army is fleeing.
Bush 41, when he made that decision to stop after 100 hours, that was the right decision because we met all the objectives. We met the UN resolution objective, we met the congressional position, and the coalition was comfortable with what we did.
And so the president said that would be the end, and so the ceasefire was 0800, 8 o'clock in the morning on the 28th of February.
But we had a very specific message and mission, which was the liberation of Kuwait.
God, an entire armada from U.S. forces, coalition forces, was brought together in the desert under a single unified command, multinational army, Marines, you know, working completely together. I mean, this was a new generation of mounted warfare and an opportunity for leaders in order to exercise the full combat effects of artillery, of air working together, of coalition forces working side by side, U.S. forces as well as U.S. forces as companies, battalions, and brigades doing what they needed to do.
Number one, I thought that the Iraqis would be much more difficult as a foe. Now, that turned out not to be the case. I mean, there were pockets that fought very well, Iraqi forces that fought very well. But by and large, I knew we had a great plan. Number two, we had great troops. And number three, we had great technology.
So the Patriots provided us a great deal of assurance. As far as being an effective weapon, the Scuds were not that effective overall. And the Patriot is just getting deployed, so there was an argument whether it really killed the system or not. And it turned out that it did, and it's a good system, and now is a very important system in our inventory.
It goes back to the non-commissioned officers, the standards, the training level that we had reached at that point in our history as an army. And so there's no doubt that when we launched into Kuwait, that we blew through the not only the Iraqi army but their Republican Guard, which was the best troops. We went through them like water through a screen door.
Our aim was to protect even the Iraqi soldiers whom surrendered to our resistance, not to be shot or killed from the resistance. They surrender and we protect them, we give them food, supply, medical treatment, and then we handed over. I handed over personally them to the coalition forces as a prisoner of war.
You know, when the officer asked questions, I would, translate in Arabic and get his answers and pass it on to the officer. Knowing their reputation of how ruthless they are to be in that situation where they've been interrogated by a Kuwaiti guy, you know what I mean?
There were hundreds of soldiers that surrendered to enemy Iraqis, and we continued. We'd mark them, we'd pass them back. The following units that would come through, they would tag them and process them, and we would continue the attack as we did on the second day.
They asked the guy, "Why did you surrender?" And he said, "Well, I told you already why I surrendered." He said, "Well, tell us again." He said, "Well, it's because God was on your side." And he said, "Well, how do you figure God was on our side?" He said, I was eating a meal on my tank, and I heard no vehicles, I heard no shell fire, and the tank on my right exploded. So I jumped off my tank, and my tank exploded. God was smiting our tanks with lightning. what it was there's an M1 tank 3 kilometers away in a hull down position shooting Sable rounds. Sable round goes faster than the speed of sound, so you'll never hear it before it hits. He's far enough away, I was looking the wrong direction. He didn't see the muzzle flash, which is amazing. Once the first tank blew up, he was already deaf and blind, so he couldn't see anything anyway. We thought that was great. We told him that's correct.
And in the middle of the dinner, at around 9 o'clock or 9:30 New York time, I have received a call from the President of Security Council. I left my guest to go, at that time there was no cell phones, to go and take the phone. President of Security Council telling me, Mohammed, I have the most pleasant news for you. Yes, sir. Kuwait has been liberated.
The Gulf War put this new world to its first test. And my fellow Americans, we passed that test for the sake of our principles, for the sake of the Kuwaiti people. We stood our ground because the world would not look the other way. Ambassador El Saba, tonight, Kuwait is free. Where is it?
One week after the liberation, we had a visit all of a sudden from the Red Cross, International Red Cross. And they came to see us and they told us that we will move you to Kuwait, to liberated Kuwait. We were very excited.
So the Iraqis, they just wanted to send a good message to the coalition that they are abiding by the ceasefire and the exchange of the POW. And they took us the next day out into another location to prepare us to hand us to the International Red Cross, which happened on the 5th, March 5th.
He still today holds what he calls his second birthday. That's the day he walked across back into Kuwait from freedom.
And as we touched down in Kuwait, we knew that we are back. We are in our land. We are back to liberated Kuwait. Kuwait is free. So we were very happy. And a lot of people start to cry from happiness.
Of course, myself, my family, and some other families who have their members has been taken by the Iraqis. They suffered until 2003. And some of them are still suffering until now because they didn't know what happened to their family, to their missing members.
You know, as we speak, it's the search still goes on with the Iraqi government who's cooperating with us. I think we still have around 150 or 160 that we have not been able to find. But since Iraq was liberated in 2003, we were able to work with the Iraqi government and we found a lot of remains Yeah, in mass graves and stuff. So it's a file that's still open.
And Kuwait at that time was black with the oil fire.
The sky was grayish, black grayish actually. You can smell the burning of oil.
In the midday, it was dark, like night.
A large part of that 4 days was heavy sandstorms, fog and clouds, and the smoke off the oil fields where they had set those oil field fires over on the coast. If you remember Saddam Hussein, when he pulled out of Kuwait, they set all those oil fires there. And this smoke just fell on the desert and blacked it.
I expected that Saddam would do anything to destroy Kuwait. There were 730 wells on fire on all major oil fields in Kuwait, and around 400 wells gushing. The oil field, they were covered with cluster bombs and mines that the Iraqi set.
I told that general who was assigned for the engineering to load those wells with emission or with TNT. I said, General Saad, why do you do that? What you are doing, it's bad. Why do you do that? We're trying even to convince him. He said, Ahmed, I will blow every well, and I blow you guys here as well, kill you all, because they're holding my children and my family. I will do whatever I ask, just to save my children.
The devastation, I had an opportunity to get in a vehicle and go down to all those oil wells that were on fire. And I have never been so close to something that violent in my life, even to today. And it's hard for me to describe the violence of it.
Broken library, no books, we had nothing. Nothing. When I say nothing, nothing.
During the occupation, the Iraqis did come in and they looted the museum. They took almost everything out of it, and what they didn't take, they destroyed or damaged. And it was through the UNDP that they were able to get back most of the pieces, but not all.
We have to start from the beginning. And at that day when I arrived back to Kuwait, I have called some of my friends who are on the boards, and we decided to rebuild right now.
And by that time, again, there was most of the city was functioning. There were things that were down. And so the Corps of Engineers came in, and big power plants were outside the city, and they worked to restore them. All the big contractors in the world came to Kuwait to restore them. And again, their people came back, and they could hire all the engineers in the world to get the base functions going and restore their city. And they did. They did a great job.
In many ways, they were able to rebuild things that might have been getting old otherwise. But what I think may be most important of the changes after the liberation were some of the political liberalization changes. The parliament was restored, and in 2006, Kuwaiti women got the vote, and today the position of Kuwaiti women is better than in all the other countries of the region. Kuwaiti women vote, they can serve in parliament, they serve in the cabinet, they are CEOs and senior officers of corporations in Kuwait, and they play a very, very vital part in Kuwaiti life. I think a lot of this grew out of the liberation and the desire to make the country better, since they had a chance to remake it from scratch.
I think this type of political disasters or economic crisis changed people's attitude, motivation, and all of that. So I think that was a critical timing to move and change. So the crisis was really a harsh experience for all of us.
We established the Kuwait America Foundation in Washington. And the aim of this foundation is to say thank you to the American.
We had great success in showing the American people what their armed forces were capable of doing. They went nuts. You know, but I say, hey, give the American people as many parades as they want. We haven't had it like this. This is sort of cleansing our palate of Vietnam.
Coming back from Vietnam, we came back to a troubled nation. I had, when I got back, got the opportunity, great opportunity to march with the 1st Armored Division in Washington, D.C. parade and the New York City parade. And we mostly were in our combat uniforms, the desert-colored ones. And a lot of guys, if I got on the metro or whatever, would come up to me and say, you know, when I came back from Vietnam, I wasn't welcomed, you know, and my answer to them was, I'm a Vietnam veteran too, and you set the stage for what we just did in Desert Storm. We built on what you guys did.
And there were 2 Marines out there in their uniform. And for me, that was closure on Vietnam. I mean, here I was, I couldn't wear my uniform when I came back, but they were wearing their uniform. I said, it's all over, it's good.
Their experience is something an American mercifully can never understand. As several Kuwaitis put it to me, we went to bed Kuwaiti and we woke up Iraqi. Our country disappeared overnight. The psychological nightmare of losing your country is still deeply felt among Kuwaitis who were old enough to remember the invasion. Just as it still exists with my friends and colleagues who were in the embassy. You know, that won't go away. These are life-changing, life-shaping events. It is a fraternity and sorority of those Americans and those Kuwaitis who went through occupation and liberation together. It's one of the strongest bonds I've ever seen.
They are real heroes. What they did, how they coped with the Iraqi army and everything was fantastic. And they thanked the U.S. Army, they thanked the U.S. military for liberating Kuwait, and they've never forgotten that.
The Kuwaiti people will always be grateful to the United States for what the U.S. did for us. You gave us back our country, you gave us back our homeland. Who would do that, honestly? And you did it. The American people did it. And we'll always be grateful for that. And that's why you are what you are today in the world, because you stand for righteousness and justice and what have you. We are where we are because of what happened back in. But I can tell you in all confidence, we are in a very good place. Our relationship is in a very good place.